Okay, thank you all for joining today's webinar. This session is presented by Vivid, your independent micro-focused software user community. I'm your moderator, Tom Price. Today, James Walker will be presenting on model-based testing for ALM Octane. So thank you everybody for joining. Can we have the next slide, please, James? Great. So this webinar is presented by the UK and Ireland local user groups of Vivid in conjunction with Curiosity Software Ireland. We'll share these slides after the webinar, and I really do encourage you to click through to these links you see to check out the local user groups and see all the great events that they run. Next slide, please, James. So both the UK and Ireland user groups focus on application delivery management, IT service management, and security. They organise in-person meetings in Dublin and London, as well as virtual events. Both groups focus on the organisational, methodological and technical questions around ALM, Octane, UFT and other micro-focused tools. So joining these groups really is a great way to share ideas and learn from each other. It's also a great way to communicate feedback to micro-focus. I really do encourage you to join these groups if you're in the UK or Ireland. Next slide, please, James. So you're already a member of Vivid, so you really do know the amazing work they do. It's a truly fantastic community. It offers education and career development and also does some brilliant advocacy on behalf of its membership. So thank you to everybody in Vivid. Next slide, James. Great. So on to today's speaker. So it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague at Curiosity Software Ireland, James Walker. James is Director of Technology at Curiosity, specialising in model-based testing and test automation. He holds a PhD in visual analytics and today applies this expertise to crafting effective QA solutions. So you can contact James via email or LinkedIn and can also use the link on screen to book a meeting with James via Calendly, and that link will be included in the follow-up email that we send out after today. Next slide, please, James. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. The session is live and is intended for all Vivid members, so anybody in Vivid can join. The on-demand recording, slide deck and questions will also be posted publicly on the Vivid website and they'll be visible to all Vivid members. We'll also make them available with you directly, sending the links via email. If you have any questions as we go along, we'll be holding a live Q&A at the end, so just use the questions panel in the webinar control panel. So next slide, please, James. Cool, so this shows you where you can find the question pane. Just open up your GoToWebinar control panel and use the questions or the chat box to enter your questions. I'll collect them up and we can then feed them back to James at the end. Okay, so with no further ado, over to you, James.
All right, thank you very much, Tom, and hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are in the world. So today we're going to be talking about model-based testing, and specifically we're going to be looking at how you can fit model-based testing into the Microfocus ALM Octane tool suite. Okay, so we're kind of going to split this up into 3 sections, I suppose. So the first bit is we're going to go through and we're going to look at more kind of the theory, introduce some of the concepts, some of the workflows, you know, of how you can use Octane with model-based testing to help you unlock continuous testing and, you know, drive efficiency through, you know, your DevOps tool chain. Okay. Now, you know, as we're going through, we'll probably talk about a few examples that we're kind of seeing at the moment in the industry, some of the customers we're working with. So that'll be kind of the first bit. We'll probably spend 10-15 minutes on talking and doing slides, I suppose. And then we're going to get into more of a hands-on demo. You know, there might be a few bits that seem a bit more like a tutorial, but really we're going to go through, we're going to show you how you can really bind model-based testing, how you can create tests, create models, push these out into Octane. We're also going to specifically look at BDD and Gherkin because Octane has very, very good connectivity for that kind of infrastructure as well. So we'll think about how that can slot in, we'll show you some examples. And I think towards the end, we might move into some more advanced testing tooling and techniques like test data and thinking about some advanced scenarios. Now, as Tom mentioned, you know, throughout, if you have any questions, any comments, just post them in the box. We'll have, you know, maybe 10 minutes at the end where we'll try to pick up everyone's questions. And, you know, if there's anything you want to see more in the tools or any questions like that, we'd be more than happy to show you them as well. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump in. Now, what we're seeing in the industry at the moment is, there's still a vast amount of silos and really kind of independent thinking in the software development lifecycle. So, if you think about your typical kind of development journey, you're going to start with some type of requirement. Okay, that requirement could come from a business analyst. It could be, more kind of agile in terms of, a product owner creating a user story. But somewhere, somehow a piece of requirement exists for a feature or, a requirement that we're going to build in the software. Okay, now, someone's going to come in, define that requirement. A developer then has to come along, pick up this requirement and start to figure out what it actually meant. Okay, now what we've actually found in the industry is a lot of bugs actually formulate from, ambiguous and incomplete requirements initially. Okay, so if the requirements are not complete to start with, what the developer picks up, they may make assumptions, and what is being developed may actually end up being wrong in terms of the initial requirements. QA then come in, they have to pick up, the requirements, the actual software that's made its way into some kind of UAT or development environment. And it's almost kind of a job of trying to compare the two and figure out, is this piece of software working correctly? Is it, meeting what the requirements, were dictated in the first place? Okay, so that's kind of one challenge. The other challenge we often see is that actually a lot of test cases aren't actually that good in the first place. Especially through kind of more inexperienced testers, we see a lot of happy path testing. Whereas really to test systems effectively, you need to be thinking about all sorts of combinations, all sorts of different, equivalence classes, data, user interactions that can happen in that system. And that's really where the concept of test coverage comes in. Let's create some good test cases with a high level of coverage that are really going to test our system against the initial requirements that were dictated. Okay. Now, somewhere, somehow, typically automation engineers are getting involved. In most of the organizations, that we've kind of spoken to through our research, we're seeing that automation doesn't actually happen until 6 to 12 months after, a user story makes its way into production, which is actually far, far too late. Ideally, we should be striving for automation, in sprint. As that piece of code is hitting our development and UAT environments, we should have automation ready to go off, be executed, and be integrated into part of our regression pack. Okay. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is model-based testing. And, we're really seeing this as kind of a solution for these problems that we've just spoken about. Information hops, low test coverage, incomplete requirements, automation being created too late in the software development lifecycle. Okay, and we've had a lot of success with companies in really, driving efficiencies and increasing, quality and confidence in the software that's being produced. So one of the tools we're going to talk about today is Test Modeler, and it's a model-based testing tool. It's kind of a horrible name, but really what it means is, you're going to come in, you create diagrams, flow charts. Everyone's quite familiar with them. You come in, draw a little flow chart. This is what the requirement we should be building in our application is. This is how the piece of software should work. And as you're flowing through the software development lifecycle, that becomes a reusable asset that goes across to all the different, members of the team and all the different, automation and QA professionals taking their place. So now, to get started with model-based testing, we have a world of accelerators. There are things like scanners, recorders. We're going to talk quite heavily about BDD today, which is really starting from the left, the initial requirements. And we'll show you a little example where you can take some existing Gherkin scenarios, bring them in and start the modeling journey. Again, if you've got any existing manual test cases, existing automated test cases, you can bring them in, create a model. We actually work with quite a lot of companies at the moment who are already doing modeling before, especially in the ERP space, where there are models for things like data flows, data journeys, how we're going to, create our ERP system, etc. So there are things like Visio and BPMN importers, which can really help you get started as well. Okay, but the main kind of central point here is a model is going to be created somehow in some shape and some form. Okay, once a model is created, we can generate the minimum number of tests to maximize coverage automatically. Okay, so this is the first point. We're really thinking about coverage here. We're going to generate the perfect set of tests, and we can push them out into all your kind of standard test case management tools, a lot of which Octane integrates with already. In this particular webinar, we're going to be pushing these directly into Octane and looking at the test case management features inside there. Okay. Now, towards the end, we'll take a bit of a closer look at this, but one of the other challenges we see in the industry is test data. Okay. Now, test data is really challenging for two aspects. Firstly, if you're developing or testing a system, you actually need really good test data inside your systems to be able to perform the test you want. Now, a lot of people will look at tools and techniques like data masking, okay, which is where you're taking production data, stripping out any PII and moving it into your test environments. And, there's often this kind of, vision where production data is actually kind of gold in terms of, we can test really well with production data. In actual fact, if you take a look, what you'll see is that it's very, high volume of low variant data. Okay, so it's a lot of the same. So we have techniques where you can go off and you can say, go and find me a particular slice of data. If I cannot find any data, go and synthetically make it for me. Okay, so that's going to make sure you have all the data you need in the right places for your test cases. Secondly, what you'll find is that when you enter the world of automation, you need to have really rigorous test data available, because otherwise you may find that scripts start failing, not because there's something wrong with the system, but actually because I did not have the right test data to support my script as it was running. Okay, so on top of the model, you can go in, you can overlay all different types of data, and you can say, go and find me and make me the different data combinations that I need for my tests. Now, test automation is absolutely massive. I'm sure even on this call with all of the attendees we have, there's probably over 20, 30, 40 different automation frameworks that we're all using between us. Okay, there's so many different frameworks out there. Now, the way we like to think about test automation is actually take a look at the system you're testing, take a step back. What is the best tool out there to automate that type of application? Okay, so if it's web-based, you may be thinking about something like Selenium, but there's all sorts of different tools out there. The whole Micro Focus tool suite, UFT, LeanFT, Silk Test, etc. Any of these automation tools can be overlaid on top of the model, and then what we will do is we will take that model and we will generate the associated automation scripts into the different automation frameworks that you are using. Okay, so it's really providing one tool here as a framework and an interface to all of your different automation frameworks that you may be using. Now, the final piece here is, we'll execute some automation. We've run it. We've got some run results. What do they actually mean? So, you can synchronize run results back up to the model. You can see them overlaid, and we can synchronize them to your test case management tools and any other integration you've connected to along the way. Now, the main benefit here is, if you think about your typical kind of software development lifecycle, I've created some tests, I've created some test data, some test automation. In the world of Agile, things are changing all the time. A new requirement may come in, a new user story may come in. Our actual system has changed in functionality, or we've changed the color of a few buttons or something, and our automation is broken. Instead of having to go through all of these different assets and update them individually, you just keep the central model up to date. We will update the tests, the test data, and the test automation, rerun the automation, and push the results back up. Okay, so that's kind of model-based testing at a glance. Now, just to go through kind of a few benefits here of modeling and where we really see a lot of value to companies. So firstly, by creating a model, you've got a reusable asset here, which enables, cross-team collaboration. So anyone can come in at this model and they can take a look and they can understand, exactly what the requirement was. It's very unambiguous. It's not like we've got huge walls of text. We've got a clearly defined image here, which is showing us how this system should be created. Okay, developers can pick this up. They know what they're creating. Testers know what they're testing. You can overlay automation, you can overlay your test data, and it's really one asset as a single source of truth for creating all of the different dependent assets that you need throughout your software development lifecycle, your automation scripts, your test scenarios, your requirements, your test data, any virtual services you need along the way can all be generated from one model. Okay. Now, the other piece here is, we're kind of stripping out and removing a lot of interdependencies and also ambiguities that are occurring. If you look at a flow chart, it's actually very clearly defined. It's very hard to actually build a flow chart which is ambiguous. And usually, if you do, it's pretty obvious to anyone else coming in to take a look at that within 5 or 10 seconds, get an idea that this flow chart is not actually very good, or it's not a very good requirement, and we should send this back to get some more details in there. Okay, so that's one benefit. The other benefit here is it actually becomes almost a piece of living documentation. If you look at most companies, there's a lot of technical debt because, systems were not documented properly. It was always left in the hands of some SME who perhaps left the company or moved on to somewhere else. So having a piece of living documentation, a living flow chart that flows throughout the software development lifecycle, persists while the application is updated as the application is changing, is going to avoid a lot of technical debt and keep teams aligned as we're progressing through. Now, the main aim here of what we're trying to achieve, and hopefully you'll get a good sense for this from the demo that we're going to show you in a bit, is we're really trying to help you achieve in-sprint testing. We mentioned at the beginning that a lot of automation isn't actually created until 6 to 12 months after the application is actually deployed. Okay. Now, with modeling, what that enables you to do is before even a line of code is written, you can actually go through and use that model to generate your test scenarios for you. Okay, so it's truly shifting left. We want to move into the realm where you can generate your tests before anyone has even developed a line of code. You know exactly what you're testing, how the system should work, and all the different scenarios that you should be going through. Okay, so that's shifting left QA, and obviously this is where we want to be. As soon as the product reaches our UAT and test environments, we can start overlaying our automation. We can start going through and actually providing our automation tests within the sprint, having it all just in time and created and integrated into our CI/CD pipelines, etc., etc. Okay, so it's truly about in-sprint testing and removing a lot of these delays and feedback loops that we see just by people working in silos, not having the right information they need, having to recreate assets because they don't have access to what the product owner created or the tester initially had. Okay, so it's kind of one asset that flows throughout the software development lifecycle. Every single person can overlay their different attributes that they need, their test data, their requirements, their automation, and it's really building up this reusable asset to drive the software development and the quality process. So I think let's move into a bit of a demo and let's start getting things moving along a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to mostly focus initially on this tool here, which is called Test Modeler. Okay, now this is a model-based testing tool, as we mentioned at the beginning. It's a web-based platform. Anyone can come over to the URL. You can sign in using an account, and it's very much a collaborative workspace. Okay, this can be installed on premise, or it could be used inside one of our cloud portals as well. Okay, now you'll see here as soon as you log in for the first time, you've got a little quick tutorial section. You can come into any of these and they will show you how to use Test Modeler for these different automation frameworks and different CI/CD tools. Okay, so if you're looking to get started, just come in, click on one of these, and you can follow through the tutorial step by step to start creating some automation. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start from the requirements. Okay, and we're going to come in and we're going to create a brand new model here. Okay, now the requirement I want you all to envision is we have a pretty simple login process. You come into a login screen and you can basically enter, a username, you can enter a password, And if you click the sign in button, you end up registered or you end up not authenticated. Okay. Now we're inside here and we're inside our model editor view. For those of you who have done any kind of BPMN modeling or have used Visio before, it's very similar. You can come in, start dragging and dropping blocks, moving them around and connecting them together. Okay, it's pretty simple. Now, what we're going to do is we're specifically going to build a model here for our login system. Okay. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to the login page. Okay, so perhaps I go to the login page. That's fine. We've got a little block to do that. The next thing we're going to think about is our username. Okay. Now, a lot of the time, what we see is people will come in and they will start just thinking about the happy parts. So maybe we'll do that initially, and then we'll loop back and start thinking about some negative scenarios. So the first thing I could do is I could enter a correct username. Okay. I could then come in, I could start thinking about a password. Okay. And I could then enter a correct password. As so, we'll connect that up. Rename our condition here to password. Now, if I go through these two, I enter a correct username, I enter a correct password, and then I click the login button. Okay, we're thinking about user interface here. Then I should end up authenticated in my application. Okay, that's pretty obvious, right? Now, a lot of testers will end up stopping here, and they will think that that is probably good enough to test my login screen. Now, the biggest piece of value from testing we find is actually testing negative scenarios. What happens when bad things happen to my system? When I'm talking about bad things, I could be talking about sending a bad request to an API. Here, I'm thinking exclusively about entering different types of bad usernames. So maybe I enter a bad username. I could go much deeper in here and I could start splitting this out into different equivalence classes, perhaps usernames that contain, different special characters or a username that doesn't exist in my database, etc. But here we'll come off and we'll use one. And then I can think about different passwords. Now, if I enter a bad username, I can enter a incorrect password. Okay. Or I could also come in here and I can enter a correct password. So let's pick that one up. And then I can connect these two together. Okay. Now, if I do this and I click the login button, then I should end up authenticated, or perhaps I get some kind of user authentication error message. Okay. So let's connect this up as so, and we're actually missing one arrow here, which is coming from the password. Okay, if I enter a correct username and then I enter an incorrect password, I should end up in that error state as well. Now, what we've essentially done here, if you take a look, we'll just do a quick little save, is we've actually created a model of our sign up, our login process. All the different routes I can go down where I do not end up authenticated, and the routes I go down where I do end up authenticated. Now we can tidy this up a little bit, just do a quick relayout, looks a bit nicer. Now we've got a model here, let's do something with it. So the first thing we're going to do, we can come in here and we can say, let's go off and generate for me my test cases. Okay. Now in the world of modeling, paths are test cases and test cases are paths. So if we look here, we actually have 4 paths that have been created. If I flick through these, you'll see that they're covering different routes through our model. Okay. Now, these have been created using an algorithm, okay, that goes away and generates the minimum number of tests to maximize different coverage criteria. Here we've selected a medium level of coverage, which is going to cover every edge. You could select a high level for every in-out edge combination. You could go all the way up to exhaustive, test every single possible route for a particular system. Okay, but here we've selected medium, and we've got 4 test cases that have come out the back end. Okay. Now, what we can do initially with this is we can come in and we can say, let's go off now and let's perform an export into Octane. And let's call this our login CRM system. Okay. Now, within Test Modeler, we have a very broad range of different connectors available, but all sorts of different CI/CD tooling, and Micro Focus Octane is one of them. If I come in here and take a look, what you will see is firstly, we've set up a little connection to go and connect to our instance, but also we've got a fully customizable field mapping engine in here that you can map any field from Octane into any field from Test Modeler. Okay, so it's very powerful, it's very flexible, it supports custom fields and custom mappings. Okay, initially we're going to be exporting some manual tests because we've got a manual test model, but then we're going to overlay some Gherkin and start thinking about that. Okay, so you'll see our export is complete here. We've exported 4 tests. We come back into Octane here and let's do a refresh. Come down to the bottom, we'll see we've got a new test suite that's been created. If we open up this test suite, we've got 4 manual tests inside here. Let's pick up our authenticated one, and you'll see in here we've got our test steps. I go to the login page, I enter a correct username, I enter a correct password, I click the login button. Okay, it's not particularly very interesting, but that is one instance of how we can export some tests and push them out into Octane. Now, the next piece we're going to do here is we're actually going to utilize and leverage Octane for the great BDD and Gherkin connectivity it has on offer. Okay, so we're going to transform our models here into basically a visual BDD model. Now, to do that is very simple. All you have to do is come into the model, right click, and start tagging blocks as whether they're a given, when, or a then. Now, I go to the login page as a given, so we'll tag that one up. I enter a badge username, it's going to be tagged up as a when. I enter a correct username, exactly the same again, so when. These 3 are going to be when statements, my different passwords, equivalence classes, and data that I'm entering. And then finally here, we've got the I click a login button. Okay, so we'll tag that one in. Into that. We'll tag this as a when. And then, we've got our then statements over here. The user ends up authenticated. We can tag this one as a then. We can tag this one as a then as well. Okay, so essentially we've transformed our model that we had into a visual BDD model, which is now going to be used to generate Gherkin. And we can now come off and we can say, let's come in here and let's do a new regenerate. Tag these up properly first. So we'll tag this, we'll do a generate here. This is going to generate my different paths. And I could now come off here and say, let's go and push some Gherkin into Octane. That's what we'll do here. We'll pick that up. We can say this is now going to be our login Gherkin, and we can push this out. Okay, and this is going to go away into our system and it's going to go and export the test definitions for us. Okay, so if we come in here, look. So we just need to change our connector actually. So we need to change this into Gherkin. Before it was on manual test. So let's do that. So we're going to push out our Gherkin test, which is absolutely fine. Come back into our model here. Let's do an export and let's push out our Gherkin test. So we'll select Octane again, which is this one. And we'll say this is going to be our login with our Gherkin. And we'll hit the export button to go and do that export process. Okay. And we'll see here, it's going to go away and perform, these exports. So let's give this one a second. Let's come back into Octane here. Start doing a little refresh. We'll see down the bottom here, we've now got 4 new Gherkin tests. Okay, let's open up our authenticated one and take a look. And what you'll see inside here is we've now got our different feature files. Okay, so here we've got an authenticated feature scenario. Given I go to the login page, when I enter a correct username and a correct password and I click the login button, then I end up authenticated. So that's how we can use Test Modeler to come in and start, exporting tests, pushing them out into Octane, okay, and also exporting BDD scenarios which can then be picked up. Now, at this point, not even a line of code has been written and we have created a model with our requirements and we've exported test definitions into Octane. Now, what will happen next is the developer will pick up this model they can start to build out their implementation, and they should end up with a login screen to represent their process. So here we've got a login screen to represent our CRM system. Okay. Now at this point, you can come into your Cucumber framework or your Gherkin-based framework, and you can basically come in and you can use the Octane connector down the bottom here. And you'll see here we've got 2 work items that have been assigned to us. Okay, and these are actually some of our Gherkin tests that we just did an export for. So we can open this in the browser, and we can have a little look and see the script. Okay, now what we can do from our IDE is we can say, yes, we want to pick this up. Let's take this Gherkin script and let's push this into our tests, and let's bring this into our Cucumber framework. We can bring this in, and we've got our feature here, and we can then go away and we can start mapping the automation into our Gherkin code here. Now, Test Modeler has a number of accelerators to help you with this. We're not going to go through them in this session, but Tom will certainly follow up afterwards with some videos, and there are links available inside the presentation as well. But basically, you can come in here, you can start using some of our accelerators to go in and start scanning applications, and they're going to help you build out and create glue code to help you automate your different scenarios for your BDD and Gherkin. So here we've just scanned 3 objects, and we've picked out a whole world of different identifiers in the automation world, and we can automatically create the glue code and the different automation objects to map to those Gherkin files. Okay. Now, what you may find in your organization is you have some assets that exist already. Okay. Now, we actually have some Gherkin feature files here that have already been created for us for some different parts of our application. Okay. Now these, as we said at the beginning, these could be manual tests, they could be automation scenarios or existing models, okay, or even textual requirements. Okay. Now we're going to come in here and we're going to build out a new model. So let's pick this one and let's open it up. Okay. Now, just like before, we've actually got a blank canvas here with our model editor. We can come into the connectors panel up here, and you'll see just some of the connectors that we've got available for existing, assets you may have in your software development lifecycle. We're going to select an existing Gherkin, and we'll paste that Gherkin in here. So we've got our feature file, and we've got 2 scenarios here. Now this is actually quite interesting. One of the scenarios is pretty static, just got some static data in. The second scenario is a scenario outline, which has some parameterized data which is feeding through. Okay, now we can come in here, bring this in, we'll hit the import button, and what you're going to see here is this has automatically created a model for us, which has been reverse engineered from our Gherkin feature file that we just brought in. We look at the test paths here, you'll see we've got 2. The one with the static data, it's pretty obvious. This one's a bit more interesting because we've got our parameterized data value here for our account name. If we take a look, what you'll see is that in the background here, we've got a data table, and this data table has all of that example data, because listed down here, plugged in, and it's going to multiply this test with all of our data references and data examples. Okay, so that's how we can take an existing assets, and we can really help you get started with this modeling journey. We're very much not interested in disrupting the way you're working and the existing assets you've spent a lot of time making and creating. We'd much rather come in, take some existing resources you have, reverse engineer a model out of them, and help you transition and start creating models and creating value from using the model-based testing approach. Okay. Now we're actually working with a few companies at the moment in transitioning from one tool to another. So we're working with one company in particular who have all of their tests inside ALM, and they're now particularly looking at migrating and rolling out Octane throughout their different development groups. Okay, so we have full connectivity into ALM. You can start importing your existing ALM test cases, create a model in the same way, and then you can come off here once you've got that model and you can say, let's go and push these out into Octane. Okay. Now this is great because it enables you to firstly bring in existing tests and reuse them. You can take a look, do a little assessment, a little audit of what you have already, maybe do some tidying up optimize your tests, and then push them back out. Okay. Now, the next piece I want to move into in this demo is to move into a bit more of an advanced scenario and start thinking about, basically some more complex pieces. Now, let me start to reload that because that did not look like the best error message in the world. So let's come in here and perform a login. Hopefully we'll have that luck. Let's see. Okay, good. Right, so here we've got a CRM system. Okay, and within this CRM system, we have an opportunities form. And this is where users can come in and they can start creating, different sales opportunities, which, the company is currently focusing on. Now, there are two caveats in this screen if you want to go off and actually test this particular application. Firstly, for the account name, you actually need to know what account exists in the back end, otherwise you get an account not found error. And it's also the same for a campaign, otherwise you get campaign not found error. Okay. Now, this is quite a simple example, but actually it rings true for most kind of problems in the automation space. I have a particular API endpoint, or I have a particular UI screen I need some data for, or I need to find the right data values to do some testing on it. Another example is we're working with a company at the moment who are mostly doing dashboard testing. They will log into a system, they will get a load of graphs, a load of pie charts, bar charts, different graphics. And testing for them is really, they need to go in, log into those dashboards and assert the values that are being displayed are correct. Okay. Now, in order to do that, you actually need to know what data exists in the back end. You may need to do some data transformations, some lookups to find that data. But at the end of the day, you're going to be finding data and doing your assertions or entering it into some user interface. Okay. So this is a very familiar problem, which hopefully resonates with a few of you on the call. Okay. And certainly as you start moving into automation, this is a problem that's just everywhere. It's absolutely right. Now, sat behind this opportunity screen, what we actually have is a SQL Server database, okay? And inside this database, there are two tables that we particularly care about. There is an accounts table, which has all of our wonderful accounts in that we could plug into the front end. And we've also got a campaigns table, which has all of our different campaigns that we could plug into that front end as well. Now, it's worth mentioning here that for a campaign, we've got some different attributes that we can control. A campaign can have different statuses, could be active, inactive, invalid. We can also have different campaigns types. It could be email, web, telesales, etc., etc. Okay. Now, what we have built in here is a little test data management portal where you can come in and you can start creating reusable components to go and find the data you need to test your system. Okay. Now, as we mentioned at the beginning, this really could be any data source. It could be SQL Server, it could be Postgres, Oracle, could be some older technology like mainframe environments, could be some very new technology like MongoDB, Solr, Kafka, etc. But really what you can do is you can come in here, you can start to build up little reusable functions, which are going to go off and find different data for you. So the first one we've created here will go into an accounts table in our SQL Server database and find random accounts for us. Now that's not particularly interesting. Typically we'll want to find some data with specific criteria, like go and find me a transaction which is over $10,000 and may be flagged as suspicious activity. Okay. Here we've actually got some criteria which is going to go off and find different campaigns for us given a campaign type and a campaign status. So here we've got a bit of cast SQL, which is parameterized. But essentially to anyone coming in, you don't really need to understand what's happening in the background. You can come into this function, give me a campaign type, give me a status, and we'll ping back out a campaign name that you can use in your front end. Okay. So if you think about this kind of as a manual tester initially, let's come into our portal here and let's say we want to find a campaign which is of type email. Okay. Now for that, we're going to use our function to go and find campaigns by typing state. How many do we want to find? Why not? Let's go off and find 10. What criteria do we want to use? We will use a campaign type of email and a status of active. If we save this and then we go off and run it, this is going to go and perform any finds we need to go and find the test data that meets those criteria. Now here we're just dealing with SQL Server. It could be dealing with 5, 6, 10 different databases in the back end that needs all the data correlated and aligned. That's really not an issue. But what it's going to do is go away, resolve, and find the data that you need for those specific instances. So here we've got some data. Let's pick one of these up. So we can pick this one. We can now go into our front end, paste it in, and we've got a campaign that we could use as a manual tester. Okay. Now the bigger piece here is actually, everyone's kind of moving into the world of automation. That's mostly kind of what we're talking about today. And in order to do that, you actually need this data resolved just in time. Okay, you can't really just rely on this data value being static every time. It needs to be a dynamic dependency that's resolved just as we're about to run the automation. Go and find me just in time that account name, that campaign name to plug into my automation scenario as I'm executing it. Now here we've got a little example where basically what we've done is we've gone off and we've created a visual BDD, a Gherkin model for our create opportunities page. So just like we did before, we dragged and dropped various blocks on, and you'll see here, I log into the application, I go to the opportunities page. We'll come back to this one. This is where I enter a valid account name. I can then go through my different scenarios, different types, lead sources, and then again, at the top here, I enter my campaign. Okay. Now, all of those data functions I showed you at the beginning are actually available on the right-hand side here. If you come across a test scenario where you need to plug in an account name, you can come in here. Okay, you can select what you want. You can hit the import button, and there you've got a little function which is going to go and find you an account name. Okay, we could do the same with the campaign, and you're literally just overlaying and just bringing in different building blocks and different types of data you need to integrate in your scenarios. Now here, what we've done is with this function, what you will see is this is going off and it's returning a name. Okay, and this is going to be my account name, and we are plugging that into a variable into our block here, description, as a little variable which is dynamic. Okay, so here when I enter a valid account name, it's actually going to go and get that account name for me. If we look over here at the campaign, we've modeled this out a little bit further. Firstly, we've modeled out the different campaign types, different campaign statuses. We plug them into our little reusable function here to go and find campaigns for me in my backend database by the campaign type and the status, and return the campaign name. And then we're plugging that campaign name into one of my blocks here. Now, if we do a generate, okay, you'll see here we've got 11 paths which we can come off and we can push these into Octane. Okay, and at that point, what will happen is we will come out and we will get our BDD scenarios. Okay, so let's do a push here, and let's come in and look at one that we created earlier, which is this one. Now, if we take a look at one of these scenarios, this is one of the paths basically. What you'll see is that, we've got this Gherkin, it's all pretty valid. We've got two parameters in here for our outline. We've got the account name and we've got the campaign name. If you look at the table down here below, what you will see is that this has some specific syntax in here, which is special. Okay, this syntax is basically saying, as I go off and run my Gherkin, run my Cucumber framework, go and resolve these data dependencies, go and find me an account name, go and find me a campaign name. Okay, so when this ends up in your Cucumber-based framework, just before the automation is ran, we will pick up this Cucumber here with these dynamic data dependencies. We will perform data resolution on it, and what will end up is it will get transformed and resolved with the actual physical values that exist in your back end. So here we've got a little data table which exists with our account names and also our campaign names. Okay, and this is basically something that we call test data automation. Okay, just before my automation runs, go off, resolve any data that I need, go off and find it for me. If I can't find any data, go and make it. Go and get the amount of rows that I need to perform my testing, and go and dynamically pull it in so I have it just in time as part of my automation executing. Okay, and this is how this can slot into Micro Focus Octane, how you can use dynamic data inside your Gherkin scenarios. This also exists as plugin libraries that you can use in Micro Focus UFT, You can also use it in LeanFT. You can use it in your Java open source frameworks as well. And literally all you need to do is come in, add a couple of dependencies. You know, in the case of Java, it's just a Maven dependency. You can come in, add a little tag to say this is data I need to get resolved and allocated. And then literally you can just come in and you can say, go and get me a name, go and get me a campaign name to go and plug into my different automation actions that are going to be executed in my framework. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of what model-based testing is. Really, it's quite simple. It's literally just drawing diagrams. Okay, it's really as simple as that. And then from these diagrams, you can come in, start overlaying, you know, your gherkin, your different automation actions, your test data, and you can push these out into your test case management tool, like Octane here, which will fit into your full kind of, you know, Octane ecosystem. Okay. So I think this slide is actually kind of perfect just for summarizing. So maybe we'll just spend, you know, a minute just going through this slide and then we'll wrap up and get to questions. So basically, you know, what we ended up doing in this demo is we started with a product owner, you know, who created some models, the requirements, built them in Test Modeler. We imported some existing gherkin, which is fine. So that's how you can reuse your existing assets that you have. You can overlay any test data that you need from all of these different data sources that exist. You can export your gherkin with data dependencies, dynamic test data embedded into Octane, and you can push that out. And then when it becomes time to get this into your automation, you know, this time your application has entered development, it's passed through development, you can come in, you can start overlaying the glue code, you can use our various scanners to assist you with that and creating this different automation in your framework. But when it comes to running the automation, we will dynamically resolve any test data, execute your scripts, get the results, and we can push them back up into Octane and Test Modeler. Okay, so you know that's kind of the demo. That's what we wanted to go through in this webinar. Obviously, the main benefits here are, you know, firstly, we're designing, you know, our test cases, our system requirements through very simple flowcharts. Once you've got that model, you can generate your test cases automatically. You know, it's very easy to look at a model, a visual image, and understand, you know, what are we testing? How well are we testing this? Do we have the right types of data in there, the different equivalence classes, and the different routes that we want to be testing in our application? We didn't really cover virtual services, but we can also overlay them on top. We had a good look at test data and how we can very easily start creating reusable, you know, data libraries to bring in, overlay these on the model and go and find the test data we need. We can execute our tests within, you know, a wide array of different automation frameworks. We mostly just touched on a Cucumber framework today, but really that could be a Java framework, it could be a UFT framework, a LeanFT framework, Python, JavaScript, robot, etc. And you'll see from our website, we've got tutorials for all these different technologies that you can get started in and really, you know, hit the ground running in creating models and getting automation. The other piece here is obviously, you know, if any of our models change, you know, as often happens with requirements and systems, all you need to do is really update that model and you just do another generate, you hit the generate button, you do another export, and that's going to synchronize and update all the data references, all of your test cases, all of your test automation that was generated from that initial model. So it's very much a one-stop shop for, you know, DevOps and testing and your, you know, continuous delivery pipeline. So with that being said, I'm going to hand over back to Tom, who's going to talk a bit through this slide, and then maybe we can open up for questions. Okay, Tom?
Great, thanks, James. Thanks for the presentation and the great demo. So we've got just under 10 minutes for questions. So please do enter any questions you've got in the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. We've already had some great questions come through, which we'll get to in a moment. So this slide is basically just said, if you want to talk further with James about anything you've seen today, you can book a meeting via Calendly. That's Curiosity-James there. If you want to try out Test Modeler, you can get a free trial at testmodeler.io, and you can also connect with James on LinkedIn, drop James an email, or follow Curiosity on Twitter. So we'll send these slides out to you, and you'll have all of these links there for your reference. So next slide, please, James. Okay, so we're going to go on now to the Q&A, so keep the questions coming in the chat box. So James, you've had a question come through about when in this approach you would automate rather than execute manually. So what factors might lead you to decide to execute a test manually? And particularly, is it the creation and maintainability effort that sometimes does not justify automation?
Yeah, this is actually a really, really good question. So, I mean, in terms of when you can automate your tests, obviously automation, you can't actually automate until the application exists, right? You need to know your identifiers, the system needs to be there. In terms of, manual testing, as we've seen in the demo, you can create your manual test scenarios as soon as a requirement is created, right? As soon as that requirement's there, you've built the model, you can export your test scenarios. Now, we've actually seen instances where they're not executing the test per se, but they're looking at these different test cases to look at them and see, do these user scenarios actually make sense? So you're almost going through the model and you're kind of testing your requirements, you're not testing the system. So that's, actually really powerful because you're testing user scenarios. Does this scenario make sense as a user? Are there ambiguities in what we're asking to be created here? Okay, so that's kind of more user scenario testing. In terms of, actual testing, you can execute these manual tests in your development cycle. A developer can pick them up as soon as, they start writing, their lines of code. They can pick them up and you almost use them as an acceptance criteria for their own user stories that they're going through. Or, you can come in as soon as that, from a tester perspective, if you have QA, you can come in and get your QA to execute those tests when that system, goes into a UAT kind of environment. In terms of, when should we be creating automation? When is it valuable? I think the word value is actually really crucial here. And I would say this is true for not just testing, everything throughout the whole software development lifecycle. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose in doing this? How much value are we going to get out of doing it? If we're only going to ever want to, run a test case once or twice, or maybe once a year, then there's probably really not much value in actually automating that. You're probably just better sticking to manual testing because, it's actually cheaper to run the test manually than it would be to create the automation and run it only once every year, right? And as, a bit of a bland example, but it really does just come down to value. If we're going to be executing our automation all the time, then, these test scenarios are going to be executed all the time. There probably is value in automating that, providing it's not going to cost a lot of money to keep maintaining that test case. But certainly from what we've seen with modeling, we can really reduce that maintenance cycle, the maintenance effort, and the cost of maintaining your test cases. Okay, hopefully that answers that question.
Brilliant. Thanks, James, and thanks for the great question. So we had a question about exporting test assets. Somebody's asked, how do you decide where the tests go? So does it always go under test suite like in the demo? And how do we handle custom test case formats?
Yeah, great question. So I mean, that's fairly typical, I would say. Every organization we work with is using these tools in almost completely different ways. And I think that's absolutely great because if you look at Agile, actually it's all about being adaptive, finding a way that works well for your teams and implementing it. Okay. Now with Test Modeler, we're really not coming in and we really don't want to dictate the way you should be working, which is why we've got connectivity into so many different tools across, the kind of DevOps lifecycle or, system space, I suppose. In terms of, Octane and how we can do that, we've got a very customizable mapping. You can literally come in and decide how you want to map any field to any attribute, where you want these to be pushed to, what the different test types should be, what project, what workspace we're working in, etc. So it's very customizable and it's really all about, deciding, the different structures your test existing, how we want to map them and where they should go, and then getting Test Modeler to actually create these. It's just a one-time effort to create this configuration. But once you've got that in place, whenever you do an export from Test Modeler, it's going to create those tests where you want them in the format that you typically create tests in. Okay, is that okay?
Great, thanks, James. So we've got time just for this last question we've had come in around Gherkin. So somebody asked, when importing Gherkin, how do you handle dynamic or variable example data?
Okay, yeah, great. So, I mean, we kind of did that in the example that we brought in here. So, if you look at the Gherkin here, what you'll see is at the bottom, it's got examples. Okay, so this is really your example data that you're feeding in. And, you could end up with a model here, you could explode it, you could end up with, different blocks for all of these 10, examples. But actually, what's much better is we have this concept of a data table inside Test Modeler. And this is really where you can come in, take your scenarios, and you can say, this is the example data that I want to feed in. So you can kind of parameterize your tests and say, let's drive 10 different data rows through here, and think about it more from kind of a concept of, almost data-driven testing your scenarios. So we have full support for that, along with, full support for given, when, thens, etc. So we've got pretty good coverage over the Gherkin syntax and different features in the specification. Is that okay?
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, that's all the time we have for questions today. But if you have any further questions, do keep asking them in the question dialogue, or you can email them through after the fact. We'll publish the written Q&A on the Vivid website. So if you could now, please, James, go on to the upcoming event slide.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So yeah, if everybody, please do keep an eye on the community calendar for future events. In the UK and Ireland, we're currently planning a virtual Octane roundtable, and in future also a user group, so keep an eye out for that. On screen you've got 2 events which might be of interest to you. So for German speakers, we've got a web event from the Testing, Quality and Application Lifecycle Management Special Interest Group that will focus on agile development and testing with ALM Octane. And then the New England user group are hosting a virtual event with micro focus on smarter testing, superior outcomes. So those are just 2 events for the upcoming community calendar. Do go onto the Vivid website and keep an eye on what's scheduled. Great, so next slide please, James. Brilliant. So really we'd love to hear from you. Any feedback on the session, you will all be sent a survey asking for your thoughts. If you're based in the UK and Ireland as well, you're going to get a survey specifically asking what you want to see in future events. If you can take the time, it won't be long, fill out that survey. We'll therefore be able to create events really tailored to you and to your interests. So if you could take the time to fill out either of those surveys, that would be fantastic. Okay, well, all that remains to be said, I think, is James, thank you so much for that. I enjoyed that. I hope everybody else who joined today did too. And thank you to everybody who's joined and to everybody who asked questions.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.